So I'm John Askew, and I don't have a loud voice, so I'm going to try to project today. It's Garrett, and we're going to talk about offensive security testing. You can see the title, An Elegant Test for a More Civilized Age. This was May the 4th week, May the 4th be with you, so a little bit on the brand. And we're gonna we've got a lot of bullet points, but we're gonna try to talk through those, and really would like, if there are questions, just feel free to raise your hand or speak out, and then if we have time at the end, we'd love to take questions as well. I'm sure we're forgetting some things, but our agenda is 3 questions. Why do you need offensive security testing? Then what are the objectives of an offensive security test for different types of tests? And then finally, how do we make testing successful? So if we answer those 3 questions in the next hour, then I think we're doing pretty good. So starting off, why do you need offensive testing? So who in here has ever gotten a pen test or been tasked with purchasing or leading or obtaining a pen test, penetration test? We got a decent number of people. So when you go to acquire or purchase or whatever, organize a pen test, what are you doing that for? Why did you ask for a pen test? Does anybody have a particular
Compliance requirements, regulatory requirements.
I told you had to? Anybody think that this would actually improve your security posture somehow? You have a specific thing in mind? Well, we get a lot of answers to the question, right? Because terminology is hard. I want to make sure the bad guys get about a 5 seconds away.
Fair at all?
It's not advancing.
Be awful.
All right, I'll just read them off. So
It's advancing online.
it is okay, good. So I want to make sure the bad guys can't get in. That's one thing we've heard before, right? Seems like a tall order. We need to confirm that we have no vulnerabilities. Another pretty tall order, right?
There we go.
Oh, sweet. Our managed SOC or our defenders say that they're going to catch anything that happens, but we're not sure about that. So we want to make sure that we can catch that. Auditor said we got to get one. Whatever this is, we have to get this thing. Or we got a contract with some other business partner that says we've got to do something on an annual basis for some particular application or environment or whatever. So that's a lot of different things. Can we address all those different items with one approach? Do you think?
No.
Oh. Seems like it'd be a challenge. What even is a pen test or penetration test? The problem I have with this is that this term can mean just about anything, right? Because for better or worse, security cybersecurity as an industry is good at taking terminology and using and abusing it to make sales, whether that's intentional or unintentional or otherwise. There's a lot of muddying the waters in terminology, and I'm basically resigned to. If I hear somebody ask for a penetration test, that's just an invitation for more conversation about what you actually need. Right? That might be there might be some kind of adversarial threat element in there, like I've heard the terms red team, ethical hacking, adversarial simulation, some type of pretending to be a bad guy as part of the ask there. We might be looking to find a bunch of issues that we can fix to elevate our security posture, right? So you might be looking for something like a vulnerability assessment, where we're going to get a list of vulnerabilities. We might want to find a bunch of issues to add to our developer backlog to make our software that we're developing more secure. So there's a lot of different things that this pen test can mean, right? But if you get down to it, why do you really need anything in technology? Hopefully, it is to support the overall business. So a penetration test, ultimately, why do you need a penetration test or an offensive security test? Is to support the security program, which in turn supports the overall business. Because if it doesn't line back up to that, then there's not really a point in spending money on it, right? Or allocating time. And why is this a thing that actually supports our security program? Well, I might be a little bit biased because I've been doing offensive security testing for a couple decades, but I see time and time again where offensive security finds issues that other security controls and other processes miss or overlook. And I think that ties back to the mandate that the offensive security function has to, in some ways, think like an attacker and think outside the box. Whether that is thinking like a particular threat actor like Lockbit, whose database just got dumped recently and everybody's analyzing that. How do their specific techniques and tactics work? How do they operate? Or maybe it's more diving into a specific technology. How does that technology work and how do vulnerabilities or issues arise within a particular technology? But we're charged to think like an attacker, think outside the box. And that offensive security hammer can be directed in a bunch of different ways to reduce our business risk. And maybe there's some regulatory compliance or contractual things that we're trying to satisfy along the way. But ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. And so it's important to align the why we're getting an offensive test with the what that we're actually getting. Because if those things don't match up, we're going to get conflict and disagreement between teams. I've been on many engagements where there's a lot of confusion between different parties as to what's actually happening and how that's providing value. So you can have even negative value from an offensive test if you're not getting it for the right reason and if you're not aligned. So we need all of the stakeholders in a project like this to be aligned on why the business needs this test and what exactly is the test that we're getting. And since there's a lot of different ways we can test, let's kind of go over some of those things and why you might need or want a particular offensive test. And no two tests are exactly alike. But there's a lot of common categories that we can kind of group things under. So we'll kind of talk through some of these and speak to some of these, what they're effective for, what they're not effective.
So why might you want to get an external security assessment? The purpose of this type of an assessment is to understand what's out there that anybody can see. Somebody that's outside of your network, what can they see that's publicly available? Publicly facing services like your web servers, whether that's things that we can find just out on the internet, things like a developer accidentally making a GitHub repository information to it. Whether that's information that's been uploaded to a site like Pastebin, where people can just dump information. Whether that's if one of your users has had their credentials in a password dump somewhere and those credentials might be compromised and still in use in the environment, things that you want to know are out there, even if you don't necessarily have direct control over them, just being aware of them so that you can tell the user to change the password or something like that. With internet-facing services, even small changes to the environment can cause major impacts. You might be perfectly fine one day, and then the next day, one of your administrators pushes a change to the firewall, clicks the wrong button, puts the wrong number in, and all of a sudden, your domain controller is sitting out on the internet. It's happened. So with an external security assessment, this is mostly a black box test. We don't need a lot of access. If you have something like an IPS in place, it might require some whitelisting to just prevent the scans from getting blocked. But we don't need a huge amount of effort from your all side to do that work. So next we have here is the internal security assessment. This is a very broad assessment. It's going to cover pretty much everything inside the network. So this is the kind of that you're going to want to get if you want full knowledge of what's going on in the environment in all the different categories, Active Directory, looking at things like certificate services, configuration of your domain. Users, how is our user process going from creating users, changing users if they change roles? We're going to look for things like dormant user accounts, users with excessive permissions. Network, going to look at the firewalls, going to look at the switches, going to dive into configs and make sure that things are configured properly. All the way down to endpoints, making sure that you have endpoint security, making sure that the highest risk systems, your workstations, are being secured, making sure that they're not exposing your highest value systems like your servers to excessive risk, and then just diving into security operations. So the less technical stuff, but how is the communication from HR to your IT department when a user gets created? Is that being followed normally? Are people getting created and assigned roles that maybe they shouldn't be, so they are made a mistake? Is HR communicating when a user's role changes, so you know how to deal with that? So this is covering a huge amount of categories, which means the most important part of this assessment is good data collection. We need to have access to everything that we can. In order to get good information on endpoints, we need administrative credentials to be able to run those scans, to pull the configurations that we need off those endpoints. We need to get firewall configs. We need to have access to Active Directory to pull configurations that we need. So this is a white box test. This is not an adversarial test. This is a test that requires cooperation, working between the testers and IT to ensure that we have everything we need to find everything that we can in the environments. A cloud security assessment is similar to an internal security assessment in the sense that it is to find as much as we can. It's going to cover a broad amount of areas. If we're doing an Office 365 review, we're going to look at Exchange, Entra ID, Azure, SharePoint, all these different sections, which means we need access to all these sections. We need the ability to pull the data that we need. If we need to look in SharePoint to find configurations for ensuring that the users are not accidentally setting their files to be accessible by users who can't. There's sort of a single pane of glass in Office 365 in the secure score, but it doesn't cover everything. There are things that we need to go into these individual applications to see if they're configured properly. For an application penetration assessment, most of the days is a web app. We do pick clients as well, but everybody's moving to web applications. Everybody wants to put web apps on the internet because they want users to be able to easily get in, do their stuff, want their users to have a more seamless ability to interact. And increased access for users is going to mean increased risk. Those user accounts are not directly controlled by you necessarily. You have to trust them to keep their passwords secure, and they won't get phished or have their credentials in a data breach and somebody's going to reuse them. So your user accounts are going to get compromised at some point. So making sure that when that happens, the attacker's access is limited. They can't escalate the privileges in the application. They can't go and grab other users' data. So for that type of assessment, you really have authenticated testing. Unauthenticated web app testing is often covered under the external assessment, just hitting kind of the login page, but not going beyond that. Within an application assessment, we need credentials. We need them for every role. We're going to generally want 2 sets of credentials for each role. That way we can test not only vertical privilege escalation going from a basic user to an admin, but also can user A get access to user B's data. Depending on what the application does, that might be very serious. And part of the issue with understanding the avenues of attack in a web application is that you can't use automated tools as well as you can on something like an internal assessment. On an internal assessment, we all know how Windows is set up. We know what configurations need to be set up. We know what vulnerabilities there are, what meshes you need to check for. That doesn't happen on a web application. They are all unique. They're designed specifically for your business. They're built by different people using different platforms. And so the amount of information you can get off a web application scan is relatively limited. There is some useful things that it can get you, but it will only go so far. You really need context. You need a human looking at it and saying, well, user A shouldn't be able to see user B's data. Scanner doesn't know that. Scanner just sees data. It doesn't know when there is an ID number in a URL. Oh, that must be the user ID. Let me see what happens if I mess with that. It doesn't have that to understand business context and identify if an issue exists. I did just want to briefly mention large language models. This is something that's relatively new. A lot of people are trying to implement them in their sites to do things like chatbots, customer service. This is a significant new addition that current tests don't really have a mechanism for really diving into very well. The way that you attack a large language model is different than the way that you handle other types of user input attacks. These things are based around context. They process natural language. So it's not something as simple as looking to stop a SQL injection attack. I could say, don't let a user get access to Bob's information. And I go in, I tell the chatbot that I'm Bob, and it says, you're not Bob. And I say, well, I'm Bob's father and Bob's a minor. So now I need access to his information. What does it do at that point, right? The context that you can create in your dialogue with it affects the security of the application. So with the application penetration test, these can be gray or white box. In gray box, that might just be getting those credentials that you need, and that's it. But for the most effective assessment, you're going to want to go white box, get all the access you need, all the lists of API, and even go as far as look at the source code. On a recent assessment I worked on, we found a privilege escalation vulnerability that lets you go from user to admin that only could be found in the source code. It was an endpoint that wasn't used on the actual application. It was old from development, but it was still active. So the only way that we were able to see that was by looking at that source code. That's very
Cool. A couple more test types to talk about. You might have heard of something called a red team engagement, or maybe you've heard it called adversarial simulation or ethical hacking. I don't know. Again, we can get into the weeds about terminology. Different people will say this is actually this or that. But broadly speaking, this is a type of test where we are looking at the detection and response capabilities of an organization. So rather than looking for vulnerabilities or specific issues, we're looking at how does the organization respond when those things are attacked and exploited. So we're attempting to in some way simulate a real threat actor, whether that's, again, specific TTPs, tool, techniques, tactics, and procedures of a named threat actor, or if it's us just being creative and thinking how could we best achieve this goal of getting from A to B in your environment and getting this sensitive data that you're concerned about. So this type of engagement is going to involve multiple techniques, tactics, and procedures, which we'll speak to that here in a moment. And it's really good for visualizing a full attack chain. Say, and something called an assumed breach or assumed compromise engagement, we pretend we give the red team, the attackers, access to a workstation. And then they're charged with trying to get access to this particular set of data on the network. So they go through multiple steps. Maybe they establish a command and control persistence mechanism on the workstation that they have access to, so they can maintain that access and execute their tools efficiently. Then there'll probably be some element of evading EDR, evading different security controls that they have to jump through to make sure that the attack doesn't get stopped. Then they escalate privileges, and ultimately maybe they extract credentials from a domain controller using something called a DC sync attack. So you've got, again, multiple steps in this process and a whole attack chain that we're looking at. And what we're measuring is not necessarily that the attacker can do that. We don't want to test the attacker that we're paying or employing to do this. We're testing our detection and response capabilities. So the results from this engagement are going to be more concerned with the overall narrative of what happened, but also the specific places where controls can be strengthened. Maybe there's a configuration option or an EDR that you can activate to catch more things, or maybe there's a process in your SOC for escalation and alerting that needs to be changed to make sure that these certain things that were less visible now become more visible to the analysts. So that's the kind of stuff we're trying to get out of a red team engagement. Similarly, there's a category of purple team engagement. Same objective. We're trying to test our detection and response capabilities. But rather than simulating a full attack chain, we're going to get the red team, the attackers, and the blue team, the defenders, in the same room, looking at the same screens at the same time. And we're going to test individual techniques, tactics, and procedures. So rather than going through the full chain, we want to say, oh, well, can we detect this DC sync attack? So we're going to sit down, we're going to line out, here's the specific tools we're using, the commands we're running, then we run it. The blue team sees that and they go and check in the logs, the telemetry to see if the telemetry exists. Did we see event ID 4662? If not, maybe we need to turn on something in our domain controller. If we've got like Defender for Identity, did it alert correctly? Do these alerts, again, trickle up to the appropriate dashboard or the appropriate process to inform an analyst that something's happened? And this is kind of like unit testing. If you're familiar with software development, you've got broad types of testing, but then you got unit tests that test very specific things. And that's what we're doing here. We're saying, can we detect this particular item in if you're familiar with the minor attack framework, for instance, that lines up different types of TTPs. We want to go like one by one and see, this is important to us. Can we detect this one at a time? Hopefully that makes sense. Again, these are just categories. There's no exhaustive list of the different types of tests. Most tests should be customized, not commoditized. You can get very, very specific. We see with ransomware being a huge concern. There's ransomware resilience specific assessments that focus just on that particular threat and some aspects of it. They don't have to be technical. You can have tabletop exercises where you step through an attack without actually executing it, just with people around a table talking about it. How do you respond when this happens or that happens? Do we know if we have the capabilities to get logs from this system or that system in a very collaborative manner? And you can do cross-discipline type of assessments, like what happens when you combine a traditional tabletop exercise with something like a purple team, where you add some technical elements. We've had good success with like planting some fake evidence in the environment, and then conducting a tabletop exercise where we have people actually then log into their consoles for EDR and SIM systems and make sure that they can detect those things as we go through the tabletop. So there's a lot of flexibility. But again, going back to the beginning, we want to align those test objectives to our business objectives. We want to pick out the right test that fits with what we're actually trying to accomplish as a business and as a security program. There's always going to be a balance of time and cost with what you can do. Potentially, you could design a test that covers all the different things we talked about, but that's going to be ridiculously expensive. It's going to take all year, and it's going to involve a lot of different people. So it's important to prioritize what's the most important things for your program at a given point in time and focus on those. Something we see a lot of confusion around sometimes, less so these days than when I first started, but providing the correct amount of access to knowledge. As Garrett and I both have said, for these different types of tests, most of the time, the more information that a tester has, the more efficient the test is going to run, unless you're specifically testing something where there's supposed to be less knowledge. But we don't want to be testing our testers. We don't want to see how good our testers are. We want them to do their job to find out the actual test objectives. We don't waste time because if you go back to some of those questions at the beginning, can my organization be hacked? The answer is pretty much always yes. It's just a matter of time, resources, rolling the dice, different aspects. So it's important to focus on things that are reasonable, achievable, and are going to be actionable. Yes, correct.
John, what's the biggest objection you get? Somebody's like, hey, this test failed. you guys didn't do this, like, what's the most common thing you hear back for the reason why?
For the reason why it's tested.
Right. As an example, like, you guys did this pen test, but it didn't work, this was no good, you guys are trash, like, what's the reason that they usually give for that? I'm curious.
Well, we used to get a lot of like. It's a good question.
I'd say, what I've seen is, usually it's not so much that the specific test failed, but that that's not what they needed. You find out after the fact, once you start engaging, maybe like upper management and things during the reporting process, and they go, oh, this isn't what I thought we were getting. So like, there's a miscommunication between the person that we were working with, their executive, on what they wanted, what they needed, and then they're left with a report that might have useful information in it, but it's not what they needed.
Yeah, so it goes back to the initial scoping and what you're actually doing, that's the most common.
Yeah, and the biggest disconnect is probably, at least historically, was like trying to do an internal security assessment. We want to be affordable. We want to do is gather as much data to be able to make these assessments in a reasonable amount of time. But some disconnect with sales folks or with the people that were the IT department versus upper management might think, well, we're actually just paying somebody to try to hack in, and why should we give them any credentials? They're the hackers. They're supposed to be able to just get in. We don't want to do their job for them. So there's like that used to be a big disconnect.
It's never the sales team's fault, John, what are you talking about?
As soon as I said that, I knew
Never.
Never say never.
But thanks for the question. We're doing okay on time. Also understanding the limits of testing. Most tests will reflect a single point in time. Another thing you might get is, well, we had a breach 3 months later. Why didn't you find this? And that thing that happened either wasn't part of the scope, or it was something that changed dramatically in those 3 months after the test. They added some brand new system. Just a thing. So hopefully we got a good understanding of how offensive tests can vary, have different purposes, have different strengths and weaknesses. Once we outline those business objectives to why we're getting it with the what we're getting, then how do we make a test successful?
So before you even go about trying to get a security assessment, it's important to work within your group, work with all the shareholders that are going to be involved in this project. Understand what your goal is, understand what's going to be in scope, who's going to be participating, making sure that you're all on the same page before going out and looking for an assessment. That way, if sales does try to suggest something that isn't what you want, this is not going to give us what we need, and we want this specific type of an assessment. Understand what you want the outcome to be. What do you want from the test? Is it a report that lists out all the vulnerabilities in the environment? Is it an understanding that your new SOC is able to detect and respond to threats effectively? And communicating that is very important. Making sure that scope is important. You need to understand what you're going to be testing. Scope creep does happen when it's a minor issue of, oh, we just need to add a couple subnets in that we forgot. That's fine. But if scope goes from, doing an internal to, oh, we forgot we also need Office 365, that's, going to require different methodologies. It's going to be a little bit more of a problem. So understanding before you go about purchasing an assessment is important. And trust between the teams is very important. I've found this most often an issue when we're brought in by a group that's not internal IT, like if we're brought in by audit. And I had a project where I was brought in by the audit group. I go in there, I sit down with the IT team, and I found out they didn't know this was happening. This is all brand new right in this meeting. And they weren't very happy about it, which led to a bit of a hostile environment. It's not the most conducive to getting the information that we need and performing a good assessment. And have a communication plan, establish who on both sides is the point of contact. so that the testing team knows if they need to reach out in the event of an issue, or something that they need to communicate a critical risk they found. They know who to go to immediately and can get that information as soon as possible.
And everything we've spoken to so far, I just want to say, I think we've maybe unintentionally been speaking from the perspective of a third-party consultant type relationship. But this all goes for whether you are outsourcing something, one test to a third party for a particular purpose, or you have an internal team. I know many of you all have internal teams that you work with on some of these types of engagements, or even like a hybrid approach where you've got both internal and third party folks working together. I think the same principles apply in all these cases. Communication is important, so we're going to emphasize it both before testing, having a plan, and during testing, using that plan. Use effective channels, whatever's most effective for the parties involved. We've had good success with like Purple Team in particular, having a dedicated Teams channel or chat channel that we can quickly share information and copy and paste stuff back and forth as we go. But depending on the team, depending on the objectives and the type of test, you may want to have a weekly or even daily conference call during the engagement, or you may want to facilitate other types of communication, but use whatever is most effective for that particular project. Make sure everybody's not afraid to speak up if there's concerns, especially early on. It's much better to get those concerns answered early rather than towards the end of the process when most of the work's already been done. So there's a lot more opportunity to be flexible early on and course correct. And then try to be responsive to other people with their concerns. Take advantage of knowledge transfer opportunities. This one is huge for me because we think a lot about offensive testing as a process and then deliverables, right? We've got a report at the end, we've got a presentation at the end, whatever, but there's a lot of value in the process as well, particularly if you get the right people in the room together. Even if you're not specifically doing like a Purple Team engagement, but you're doing some other type of engagement, there's a lot of times when it's beneficial to have those SOC folks in communication with the offensive testers, just a knowledge transfer, just to understand the environment better. And so many like junior people love the opportunity to be able to shadow or ride alongside and just observe and maybe ask some questions in the process. And for me, running, that's very little extra work for me. And it's a lot of fun to have somebody that's interested in asking questions to be able to explain what you're doing to them as you go. So I would take advantage of any knowledge transfer that is available as part of the project. Trust is really important. If you don't have trust across those teams, like Garrett said, you'll get some pretty hairy situations sometimes. If you don't trust the people that are telling you what you need to fix, then I mean, what value is there in that? So try to trust that we've done due diligence at the beginning, getting the right people together until you're proven otherwise. There's going to be times when, with any social situation, there's potential for conflicts. So you might have somebody that's operating in bad faith, but try to assume first that it's just a miscommunication or just a difference in personality or perspective until obviously not. So most of the time it's not, or most of the time it is. Flexibility is hugely important as well. That's why we have humans doing all these things rather than robots or AI. I'm not going to even speak to AI pen testing. That's a whole other.
That was a question that was coming.
Have to get about it after hours. But if you've got a good team working on offensive testing and a good team on the blue team side, good team members can adapt. Nothing ever goes exactly to plan. Certainly you want to avoid catastrophe, but there's going to be, with any engagement, a lot of little little issues that you have to adjust for. So be prepared to be flexible within reason.
So after the testing's done, the first thing you're gonna want to do is sit down with team members, validate observations. You can start within your own team, going through the report, making sure that findings are accurate, making sure that they make sense and that they're useful. Once you've done that within your own team, having like a call with the testing team, going through the report with them, getting their additional maybe context that they can give you around the findings that they had, and just working through if there are, there are mistakes that happens in reports, often due to context. You know your networks way better than we do, and so when we're in there testing, we might miscompensate and control when we're writing up a finding and rate it as a high, and you say, well, it should be a medium because we have this other thing. And a lot of times you're right, and we'll adjust those things. And we will sometimes adjust those things within ethical boundaries. If the client wants, the high knocked down to a medium because of a reporting requirement, but it really should be a high, we sometimes do have to stand our ground and push back on that.
But there is a lot of room of flexibility within most reporting, particularly when we're talking about tying back to the business objectives. If your security program has been working for years to push this particular initiative forwards, and there's a way that we can tweak the report to better support that initiative, I'm going to be super happy to be able to do that, because that's going to help you all move the ball forward.
If you can, take advantage of retesting or validation. If you do fix those issues, oftentimes a lot of the issues we find can be fixed relatively quickly. And once those are fixed, having, if the tester is still able to get access to the environment and just go in and validate that the fix was successful. What you don't want to have happen is think that you fixed something and then that thing is actually vulnerable for a year until the next assessment comes in and says, hey, you didn't actually fix this thing. Often something's as simple as you didn't reboot the server after you applied a patch. It's especially important, I think, on application testing because of the changes made to the application. I've seen issues where they fix it and create a new vulnerability when they do that. And use the engagement to move things forward, move things along, try to use it as leverage if you need to. Now that you have a third party coming in and telling you these things are issues, it might help you get more buy-in from the executives. It might help you be able to show that it's not just you saying those things. You have, a third party that is also.
And then beyond one test, right? So testing is usually a snapshot in time or a period of time. And then it's done, we got the report and we're closed out the project. But the process of testing is cyclical, right? Whether that's, you get an annual test or a test every time particular code base has major changes, whatever that may mean to you. So there's going to be the next test, right? So a few things, don't repeat the same test over and over and expect different results. If those tests aren't helping you progress, helping you mature your program or solve business problems, then there's not really a point, right? So it's important to do things a little different if what's currently being used isn't working for the intended purpose. And also, you've got a continuously changing landscape. 10 years ago, nobody was super concerned with Azure AD, I guess, back then, Intra now. But now, pretty much every environment we look at has some hybrid Intra ID component or something of that nature. So over the long term and also over the short term, landscape changes. We need to be adaptable and make sure that our testing is reflecting that and realizing that and not just doing the same old thing. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. I know we've had many times where people say, we're going to delay this test because we got a big project coming up. That's perfectly understandable. But at the same time, there's always some kind of project coming up next. So you could use that as an excuse to not do what actually needs to be done. or be waiting for that perfect time when you've got all your ducks in a row and the test is gonna go perfectly, that time is never gonna happen. So might as well just go ahead, and if you need it today, then go ahead and start talking about it today. Don't wait for something that's never gonna happen. And then I'll end with don't fear creativity. Offensive security function, like we said, is charged with thinking like an attacker and thinking outside the box. So let's continue to allow that function to think outside the box, come up with new creative solutions as things change and as we realize that our posture has changed. If we get really good as an industry or as an organization with detecting a particular type of attack, then we need to shift and start looking for those new weaknesses, those new holes that nobody is building controls around. That's the whole point of offensive security testing. So that's all the bullet points we have. We have a decent amount of time for questions. If there's something that we can clarify or.
I'll talk to you afterward about most of them, but have you done any agentic AI testing? You guys got into that?
I have not. We're talking about it. We've definitely looked at some things. Garrett, have you seen any specifics?
I've not had a project with it yet. I've been putting some framework together in terms of how you go about testing those things. I'm mostly focused on implementation and applications. I'm trying to understand what I need to look at to ensure that that's secure.
That's coming. It's the wild, wild west out there, yeah, but it's scary.
Open season.
Yeah.
Other questions? Was this useful? I know we've got a lot of different levels of expertise around this in the room, but hopefully this is a good from baseline to something that everybody can take something away from.
Nobody else is gonna ask questions. I'm asking more, so go ahead.
And I will say also that like I'm super introverted, but feel free to come up to me and ask me questions if you see me at an event or here or wherever. I'm happy to talk to you about more about this stuff. Happy to help with mentoring or just bouncing ideas off of just try to be accessible.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you think there's any possibility of making a team that would actually look at AI and how it would incorporate it into our further testings? Because it's very much like it's coming soon, so.
As like Garrett was saying, I think right now we're looking at it more as an element of application security because that's where we see it the most getting added in as part of applications. But I mean, depending on where all it lands, I could see potentially having more of that being a specific focus for an individual or a team. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
I had mentioned in our conversation something about requirements around a vulnerability management program or a pen test, like as far as bare minimums to be sought to. Do you have any thoughts around that, like what you've seen other customers
Yeah.
try and fail to do in that area?
Yeah. So been all over the map. Sometimes we've gone into an organization that's not very mature and done a security assessment. And one of the recommendations is you need to start a vulnerability management program because you got lots of vulnerabilities and there's not really a process to deal with them. That process may not have to be sophisticated, but maybe there's something there. Other times, we've had organizations that do have a vulnerability management program, and we're able to kind of make some recommendations around strengthening it. There's probably a point though where if you already know you're deficient in a particular area, is the test going to tell you anything that you don't already know? And if it's not going to tell you anything you don't already know, is it going to give you any additional buy-in from executives or additional ammunition to move it any faster? So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to see if there are any blind spots around it. Thank you.
I got a unique one for you. How do you address the diminishing return on investment when it comes to doing a pen test? like the more you find, the less management is, open to addressing the issues that are discovered.
So you're saying if you have 100 findings, they're just gonna like take the report and put it in a folder somewhere and.
Circular maybe, it might be a circular folder somewhere that they have, but yes. Is that something that you guys get involved with, like?
I think, one way to deal with that is rather than having a report where you list every finding, and you have those 100 findings, trying to group things based on root cause, trying to understand where those issues are coming from and have a finding around that. We can,
It's not even the quantity, it's just the fact that you are finding more than, what they were expecting.
right, so once you start testing for it, you're finding things and it looks worse because you're testing for it now, like that.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Like
think
how deep
that's-
down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Exactly, like, as you start peeling back the layers, it's like, okay, you have one technical issue, now you've got a systemic issue, now you got, and they start realizing that they may have been, the facts may have been misrepresented to them by their staff.
There's an element of psychology there, I think, where like those things exist whether or not you acknowledge them, right? So me personally, I would rather know about things than not, but I also understand that sometimes it's easier psychologically to accept that we just don't need to know about that.
I think that there's also an area of that communication early on in the project, when we talk about, hey, we need an assessment, talking about, we're gonna have issues, we know that we have issues in these areas, so, don't expect a clean report. This is gonna, might hurt a little bit, but it's important.
Sometimes we're working with clients that are referred to us by lawyers or legal firm during an incident. And so once the incident is cleaned up, there's a strong will from leadership to understand exactly the state of security. And that's where, the value of the report is extremely important, because now they're ready to do something about it.
And the irony there is that if they'd done the assessment before that, would have cost them a lot less in the long run, but now that you actually have the buy-in that you need.
Yeah.
So that something actually gets done.
It's one of those moments.
I'm sorry, you've raised your hand a couple of times.
From a professional perspective, because I do forensic work, how do you protect your very sensitive information? When you write these reports, that is a vulnerability, and you've written it on your machines in your office. So how do you, and what's your time of? What's your retainment policy? What do you?
Yes.
How do you handle that with your client? Because that can be very sensitive information.
Very, very good questions. I'm not sure, in our agreements, do we state specifically? I know we have retention.
We have retention, we have a.
It automatically gets deleted.
Right, we have a film policy, and some clients have their specific requirements. Not everybody's got a retention policy. So we have our own, and we auto delete, especially the raw data. So whatever is collected from the assessment, that's going to contain a lot of information. That data is deleted,
Totally different.
X number of days after the assessment. But some organizations are coming to us as part of the agreement and say, this is our retention policy, can you match that? And of course, the answer is yes, we'll be flexible and we can match that requirement. But a lot of what we do is SaaS-based, and you can talk a little bit about our processes, John.
Yeah, a lot of, particularly the projects that I work on are more continuous testing, where we're working with the clients on an ongoing basis, doing different stuff every month. So, we'll rely on that retention policy after maybe a year or whatever to have certain things drop off. But then, individual tests, sometimes we've got clients that even, immediately after the test, they're like, can you please remove everything related to our assessment? We validate, we've gotten the report, we've gotten everything we need. So at that point, we got a designated space, we keep everything for that project. We'll just remove it all at that point.
Okay, because
Another thing you mentioned was the report itself being a risk.
Yes.
So when we include information in the report or with raw data alongside the report, we make sure to redact that information as much as possible. So if we have a password analysis finding, if it's password cracking, we're not gonna give you usernames and passwords together, right? We'll give you a list of who failed the password crack, but if we don't provide the passwords themselves, a lot of those findings will have like a host associated with them, but we're not gonna go beyond that and give information that somebody could use maliciously.
And that's part of your agreement with the client is that retention, because that's what I have to do. They have to know that I'm keeping it encrypted and safe and that for certain, because for me, I have to hold on to it for a long time because court cases take forever.
Yeah.
So,
And even internally, we don't share the report, actually, the report is within the cybersecurity team. And we got to go through special authorization from an approval from the client to share it internally with a different team that might provide a different service.
and then when you get rid of it, you provide evidence that you got rid of it, right?
And it depends on the client requirements. It's not a standard term. Because we have our retention policy and we abide by it. But if the client's got their own retention and requirement, then we can provide the certificate of distraction or whatever they like us to do.
Thanks.
Next question. Another quick question. How do you, have you experienced working directly with general counsel to execute the pen test and keeping it as attorney-client product?
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah.
Are you seeing that more as a trending forward? Is it sort of hit or miss?
It's not necessarily a trend. It depends on the context, and most of the time it happens just after an incident where the organization is not sure of the security posture and they want to show diligence that they have conducted a third-party assessment and that they've taken actions to remediate the high-risk issues. So we hire by counsel to provide that work, share the information with the organization and council, and give the organization a chance to remediate the high risk that they might not know about, and have a better story to tell if there's a lawsuit or there's something pending the data breach or the incident that we're working on.
I think we're at time, so if you got any additional questions, we'll be hanging around afterwards for a little bit. Feel free to come.